Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we will present about trade and welfare. My name is Nur Huda Abdul Aziz and my teamwork is Putra Ajro Amza bin Aladi, second Nur Shuhada binti Sobri, third Umar Al-faris bin Muhammad Noor, and last but not least is Nur Fatin Kristina binti Effendi. The introduction of trade and welfare is the area of production, distribution and trade, as well as the use of goods and services by different agents. Understood in its broadest sense, economy is defined as a social domain that emphasizes the practice, discourses, and expression of material associated with the production, use, and management of resources. Economic agent can be individual, business, organization, or government. Economic transactions occur when two groups or parties agree on the value or price of the goods or service being managed, usually expressed in a particular currency. However, financial transactions describe only a small part of the economic domain.
I want to tell you about trade and welfare theory model. There is continuum of agents denoted by W E Z, who are separated into joint group indexed by G, with the set of agents in group G denoted by set G. Agent can either be employed in one of a sector in the labor force but unemployed or out of the labor force. We index each possibility by S, with S1 indicating of one of the sector in which an agent can be employed. S equals 0 indicating non-participation, and S equals U indicating unemployment. An agent W is characterized by her group, a vector of productivities that shape her pecuniary reward to be in each S, and vector of amenity value that shape her non-pecuniary reward to be in each S, and a vector can employment probabilities that shape the likelihood and successful finding employment in each S. We denote by the productivity or efficiency unit of agent W is in S, and by the amenity value experienced by agent W if in S. After that, I want to tell you about welfare changes. We consider the welfare implication of local changes in wages per efficient unit, in probabilities of successfully finding employment, and in price index, each of which our agent treat as exogenous. We hold the wage per efficiency unit within non-participation and unemployment fixed. We calculate the compensating variation for each agent with agent give the shock. Specifically, we solve the transfer receiving in the terminal equilibrium under the new parameter value at which new agent is indifferent in expectation between the initial and the terminal equilibria. We first characterizing an agent equilibrium choice and use this to solve for her compensating variation. Finally, we construct our measure and the change in welfare for group G, which is a particulate aggregation of individual level compensating variation. That's all about theory.
Today I will present about from theory to data. We measure group level welfare change theoretically constructed. In the application, we examine the change in labor market outcome between 2000 and 2007. Each commuting zone is a cluster of districts characterized by strong deep shuttle relation and weak shuttle relation across zone. Next, 3.1. We impose three sets of restrictions that prove useful in the measurement of group level welfare change. We move to the next slide. Three sets of restrictions. First, we assume that the set of employees who choose S are intellectually optimal is not unique. Welfare change can be calculated according almost all agents to the initial choice S. Second, we assume that change in weights per FNC unit within a sector S are common across. Third, we assume that agent and sector specific unemployment rates are common across sector and across agent with common observed characteristic living within a given commuting zone. We move to the next slide. 3.2 Measuring commuting zone level relative welfare change. The objective is to measure for all 722 commuting zones between 2000 and 2007. Request that we construct each for component on the right hand side of for each commuting zone. The second part is 3.3 Unconditional relative welfare change across commuting zone. There have been large change in relative welfare across commuting zone in the US between 2000 and 2007. For example, ranking commuting zone from the smallest increase in welfare to the largest.
Empiric. We identify the causal impact on welfare across US commuting zone of granting permanent normal trade relation (PNTR) to China. We will also run version of in which we decompose welfare change into their component, wage change, and the combination of the pecuniary and non-pecuniary components of unemployment change. The price index is common across CZS and therefore absorbed into the constant. Our empirical analysis identifies relative welfare effects. For the NTR gap, the US Congress voted to grant China PNTR in October 2000 and this change in policy became effective at the end of 2001. The elimination of this uncertainty then provides a heterogeneous reduction in trade policy uncertainty across sectors. Measured by initial gap as defined in 1990. Pierce and Scott refer to the gap between the NTR and the non-NTR rates as the NTR gap. Sectors with large NTR gaps experience a relative decline in employment after China joined the WTO. NTR-GG residualized after projecting on the 1990 share of employment in manufacturing as measured in auto. There is substantial geographic variation in the exposure of region to the elimination of trade policy uncertainty. For the granting China PNTR and sectoral wage per efficient unit. We find that granting China permanent normal trade relation PNTR lowers wage per efficiency unit in a sector at the 90th percentile of exposure by 11% relative to in the 10th percentile. Pierce and Scott provide evidence of a lack of pre-existing employment trends across sectors that are correlated with the NTR gaps. We take this as evidence in favor of our causal interpretation of the results. For the granting China NTR and local warfare, estimate implies that granting China permanent normal trade relation lowers the welfare of a CZ at the 90 percentile of exposure by 3.1 percentage point relative to a 10 percentile. CZS with a higher share of employment in manufacturing in 1990 experienced relative decline in warfare between 2000 and 2007. This is because the sectoral NTR gap is positive for all manufacturing sectors but is zero for many non-manufacturing sectors. The causal effect of granting China PNTR on relative welfare is broken down into its impact of change in wage per efficient unit and employment rates. The figure just allows one to construct the difference in welfare change between any two quantiles in the distribution. Approximately 65% of the welfare effect of the trade shock are transmitted through change and unemployment rate.
And then is a robustness. In this section, we consider two robustness exercise. And the first is intensive margin of labor supply, and the second is manufacturing share. First, intensive margin of labor supply. We assume that labor supply is endogenous only through the variation of the extensive participation margin. First, our estimate implies that granting continue normal trade relation with China reduce the well-being of a CZ in the 90 percentile of exposure by 2.6 percentage points compared to a CZ in the 10 percentile. Second, our estimates imply that approximately 58% of the welfare effect of the trade shock are transmitted through changes in the unemployment rate. And then manufacturing share. The addition of this control is important to identify the causal impact 70 of granting China's PNTR on the CZ level result. Given the importance, we consider in this section two alternatives measure of this control, both of which were defined using the 1990 census. The proportion of the working age population aged 1965 employed in manufacturing and the proportion of the total wage income earned in manufacturing industry. In both cases, we define manufacturing industry with the codes in 1990 in IPUMS. The last first implies that granting China continue normal trade relation reduce the welfare of a CZ in the 90 percentile of exposure by 3.1 percentage point in the upper panel and 2.7 percentage point in the lower panel relative to a CZ on 10 percentile compared to 3.1 percentage points in our baseline. Second, our estimate implied that about 55% of the welfare effect of the trade shock are transmitted through changes in the unemployment rate in both the top and bottom panels compared to 65% 100% in our base.
In conclusion, to educate statistic measuring changes in welfare, we must consistent with labour market adjustment across multiple margins while imposing a minimum functional form restriction. Curtain trade shock can also have an impact on normal trade relations that remain against changes in welfare. There are significant negative relative benefits in this trade policy and spread through changes in the unemployment rate. We must constantly monitor effectively to control the changes in the trade policies.